The emergency room cast harsh shadows across Jennifer White's bruised face as she lay on the examination table, her ribs screaming with every shallow breath. The X-ray technician, Marcus Rodriguez, had seen thousands of injuries in his 15 years at Denver General Hospital, but something about this case made his hands shake as he positioned the imaging equipment. "How did this happen again, sweetheart?" he asked, gently, though he'd already heard the rehearsed explanation twice. "I fell down the stairs at home," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the machines. "I'm just clumsy, I guess." But Marcus had seen too many clumsy patients to believe that story. The fracture patterns on her ribs told a different tale, one of deliberate violence, not accidental falls. As he prepared to call security, Jennifer's desperate eyes met his, and in that moment, he knew he was about to become part of something much bigger than a routine medical procedure. This is the story of how one young woman's nightmare became her path to freedom, and how sometimes the people who save us are complete strangers who refuse to look the other way.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Jennifer White had perfected the art of invisibility by her 22nd birthday. In the small suburb of Lakewood, Colorado, she moved through her days like a ghost haunting her own life, carefully orchestrating every moment to avoid drawing attention to herself. Her morning routine was precise, calculated down to the minute. Wake up at 5:47 a.m. before anyone else stirred in the 2-story colonial house on Maple Street, shower quickly and quietly, dress in muted colors that wouldn't provoke comments, and slip out for her job at the local veterinary clinic before her stepfather, Robert Bobby Patterson, emerged from his bedroom. The veterinary clinic was Jennifer's sanctuary. Dr. Sarah Chen, the practice owner, had hired Jennifer 3 years ago as a receptionist, but Jennifer's natural compassion with animals had quickly expanded her role. She assisted with treatments, comforted frightened pets, and had an almost supernatural ability to calm even the most aggressive dogs. The animals seemed to sense something in her, a shared understanding of fear, perhaps, or simply the recognition of a gentle spirit that had never been properly nurtured. "You have a gift," Dr. Chen would often tell her, watching as Jennifer successfully sedated a terrified German shepherd that had snapped at 2 other technicians. "You should consider veterinary school. You'd make an exceptional doctor." Jennifer would always smile and deflect these suggestions. College seemed like a luxury from another universe, something for people who had normal families and financial stability. Her paychecks went directly into the household account that Bobby controlled, leaving her with barely enough pocket money for lunch. She'd been saving quarters and dollar bills in a hidden coffee can for 2 years, dreaming of someday having enough to move out, but the total rarely exceeded $50 before some family emergency required her to contribute her meager savings. Her mother, Linda Patterson, had been Linda White once, back when Jennifer's father, Michael White, was still alive. Michael had died in a construction accident when Jennifer was 12, leaving behind insurance money that was supposed to secure Jennifer's future. Linda had met Bobby Patterson at a grief support group 18 months later, and their whirlwind romance had seemed like a second chance at happiness. Bobby was charming, attentive, and seemed to genuinely care about both Linda and Jennifer. He moved into their house 6 months after the wedding, bringing with him a larger television, a new truck, and what Linda called his particular ways. Those particular ways had slowly transformed their home into a minefield of unspoken rules and walking on eggshells tension. Bobby had opinions about everything: how the dishwasher should be loaded, what television shows were acceptable, how much makeup was appropriate for different occasions, and especially how much attention Jennifer should receive from boys her age. Linda, desperate to maintain her second chance at love, had gradually adopted Bobby's perspectives as her own, even when they directly contradicted the values she'd held during Jennifer's childhood. The changes had been subtle at first. Bobby would make jokes about Jennifer's appearance that weren't quite cruel enough to be called insults, but left her feeling diminished. He'd insist on driving her to and from work for safety reasons, effectively controlling her schedule and eliminating opportunities for her to develop friendships with coworkers. He'd question her about every phone call, every text message, every interaction with customers at the clinic, always framing his interrogations as caring about her well-being. Jennifer's bedroom had become her refuge, but even that space felt violated by Bobby's presence in the house. He had a habit of checking on her at odd hours, always with some plausible excuse, asking about her work schedule, reminding her about household chores, or claiming he'd heard a noise that concerned him. These intrusions left Jennifer feeling exposed and anxious, but when she'd mentioned her discomfort to Linda, her mother had dismissed her concerns as normal growing pains in a blended family. "Bobby loves you like his own daughter," Linda would say, her voice carrying a defensive edge that discouraged further conversation. "He just wants what's best for you. You'll understand when you're older." But Jennifer was older now, and she understood more than her mother realized. She understood that normal fathers didn't inspect their adult daughters' clothing choices with such intensity. She understood that healthy families didn't require one member to account for every minute of their day. She understood that the tension in their house wasn't normal, and it was getting worse.
The escalation had been gradual but unmistakable. Bobby's questions had become accusations, his jokes had developed sharper edges, his helpful suggestions about Jennifer's life choices had transformed into demands backed by implied consequences. Linda, caught between her daughter and her husband, had begun choosing Bobby's version of events whenever conflicts arose, even when she'd witnessed the interactions herself. Jennifer's social life had withered under this scrutiny. High school friends had drifted away when she consistently declined invitations, unable to explain that Bobby required detailed justifications for any social activities. College friends from her brief semester at community college had stopped calling when she'd been forced to drop out to contribute more hours at the clinic. Even her coworkers at the veterinary practice knew her only within the context of work, unaware of the careful calculations that governed every aspect of her home life. The isolation was strategic, Jennifer had come to realize. Bobby's control was most effective when she had no external perspectives to compare against his version of normal family dynamics. Without friends to confide in or family members to provide alternative viewpoints, Jennifer had only Linda's increasingly Bobby-aligned interpretations of their household tensions. Money was another tool of control. Despite the life insurance money from her father's death, which should have provided Jennifer with educational opportunities and financial independence, Bobby had convinced Linda that combining all family resources was the mature, responsible approach. Jennifer's paychecks were deposited into joint accounts that Bobby monitored, and any purchases beyond basic necessities required approval and justification. "We're a family," Bobby would explain when Jennifer asked about accessing money for textbooks or car repairs. "Families share everything. Asking for separate accounts shows you don't trust us." The arguments that followed these conversations always ended the same way, with Linda supporting Bobby's position and Jennifer retreating to her room, feeling guilty for having questioned the family's financial arrangements. Over time, Jennifer had stopped asking, accepting that her economic dependence was the price of living in what Linda still insisted was a loving home. The physical boundaries had been the last to erode, so gradually that Jennifer sometimes questioned her own perceptions. Bobby's hugs lasted longer than felt comfortable. His comments about her appearance had become more personal, more focused on her developing body than seemed appropriate from a stepfather. He'd developed a habit of entering her room without knocking, always apologizing afterward, but never changing the behavior. When Jennifer had finally worked up the courage to install a lock on her bedroom door, Bobby had removed it the next day, explaining to Linda that locks in family homes suggested distrust and created unnecessary barriers between family members. Linda had nodded along, agreeing that Jennifer's desire for privacy was probably influenced by teenage rebellion rather than legitimate safety concerns. Now, at 22, Jennifer existed in a carefully constructed bubble of controlled normalcy. She went to work, came home, helped with dinner, watched approved television programs, and retreated to her unlocked room each night, always listening for footsteps in the hallway. She'd learned to sleep lightly, to wake at the slightest sound, to position herself near the window in case she needed to escape quickly. Her dreams had narrowed to simple, achievable goals.
saving enough money to rent a studio apartment across town, finding a way to complete her education without family financial support, and building relationships with people who didn't require her to justify every choice and emotion. These dreams felt simultaneously urgent and impossible, like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. The morning that would change everything had started like any other. Jennifer woke before her alarm, showered quietly, dressed in her usual muted colors, and prepared to slip out for another day at the clinic. But as she reached for the front door handle, Bobby's voice stopped her cold. "Jennifer, we need to talk." It was 6:15 a.m. Bobby was never awake this early. The deviation from routine sent alarm bells through Jennifer's carefully calibrated survival instincts, but she had no choice except to turn around and face whatever conversation was about to unfold. She had no way of knowing that this moment, standing in the hallway of the house that had never quite felt like home, facing the man who had systematically dismantled her sense of safety and independence, was actually the beginning of the end of her ordinary world.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Bobby Patterson stood in the dimly lit hallway wearing yesterday's clothes and an expression Jennifer had never seen before, something between rage and calculation that made her instinctively step back toward the door. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, and the smell of alcohol hung around him like a toxic cloud, even though it wasn't even 7 in the morning. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet that was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. "I know what you've been doing." Jennifer's mind raced through possibilities. Had he found her hidden savings? Discovered the college brochures she'd been secretly collecting? Somehow learned about the brief conversations she'd had with Dr. Chen about veterinary school? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to project calm. "I don't understand," she said carefully, keeping her voice level. "I'm just heading to work." "Work," Bobby spat the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it when you're flirting with every man who walks into that clinic? When you're dressing like a—" He paused, his eyes scanning her modest scrubs and cardigan with disgust. "When you're acting like you're available?" The accusation was so unexpected, so completely disconnected from reality that Jennifer almost laughed. Almost. But the dangerous glitter in Bobby's bloodshot eyes stopped her cold. This wasn't about her job performance or her clothing. This is about something else entirely. Something that had been building in Bobby's mind while she slept. Something that had driven him to drink before dawn and wait for her in the hallway like a predator. "Bobby, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jennifer began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't." His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't stand there and lie to me. I drove by the clinic yesterday afternoon. I saw you in the parking lot with that veterinarian. The way you were smiling at him, touching his arm, throwing yourself at him like some kind of—" Jennifer's confusion deepened. Yesterday afternoon, Dr. Martinez from the emergency animal hospital had stopped by to discuss a referral case. Their conversation had lasted maybe 5 minutes, entirely professional, and had taken place in the parking lot only because they'd both been leaving at the same time. She'd shaken his hand goodbye, a normal professional gesture that Bobby had somehow twisted into evidence of inappropriate behavior. "Dr. Martinez is married," Jennifer said, trying to inject reason into an increasingly surreal conversation. "We were discussing a patient transfer. It was completely professional." "Professional," Bobby repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call it when you wear your scrubs tight enough to show off your figure? When you bat your eyes at every man who pays attention to you?" The scrubs Jennifer wore were the same loose-fitting medical uniforms required by the clinic, in regulation navy blue. She'd never received a single complaint about her appearance at work, and Dr. Chen regularly praised her professionalism with both human clients and their pets.
But looking at Bobby's face, she realized that facts weren't going to matter in this conversation. "I need to get to work," she said, reaching for the door handle again. "We can talk about this tonight when you've had some sleep." Bobby's hand slammed against the door above her head, preventing her from opening it. The sound reverberated through the quiet house like a gunshot, and Jennifer heard her mother's bedroom door creak open upstairs. "What's going on down there?" Linda's voice drifted down from the top of the stairs, thick with sleep and confusion. "Nothing, honey," Bobby called back, never taking his eyes off Jennifer. "Just having a conversation with your daughter about respect." Jennifer heard her mother's footsteps retreating, the bedroom door closing again with a soft click. Linda had chosen not to investigate further, not to come downstairs and see what kind of conversation required Bobby to trap Jennifer against the front door. The abandonment stung worse than Bobby's accusations. "Let me go," she whispered. "Please?"
Bobby's laugh was ugly, full of something dark that Jennifer had never heard from him before. "Let you go? Sweetheart, you don't seem to understand the situation here. You live in my house, eat my food, drive the car I pay for, work at a job I allow you to keep. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because I permit it." The words hit Jennifer like physical blows. She'd always known that Bobby controlled the household finances, but hearing him frame her entire existence as his charitable gift was devastating in a way she hadn't expected. He wasn't just threatening her job or her living situation. He was attacking her sense of self-worth, her right to exist as an independent person. "My father's insurance money," she began, but Bobby cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Your father's money has been keeping this household afloat for 10 years, he said. The mortgage, the utilities, your mother's medical bills from her surgery, the car payments. Where do you think that money went? Into some magical trust fund for your future? Your mother and I used it to build a life together, and you've been benefiting from it every day since." The revelation hit Jennifer like a physical assault. Her father's life insurance policy? The money that was supposed to secure her education, her independence, her future, was gone? Linda had never mentioned medical bills or financial struggles. Bobby had been presenting himself as the family's provider, the generous stepfather supporting his wife's ungrateful daughter, when in reality, he'd been spending Jennifer's inheritance while positioning himself as her benefactor. "That money was for my college fund," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That money was for this family," Bobby corrected, "and you are part of this family, whether you like it or not. Which brings us back to your behavior yesterday and your attitude this morning and the way you've been acting like you're too good for the life your mother and I have provided." Upstairs, Jennifer could hear the shower running. Linda was getting ready for her day at the insurance office, preparing to leave for work without checking on the conversation happening in her hallway. The sound of normal morning routines continuing while her world crumbled felt surreal, like watching a movie where the soundtrack didn't match the action on screen. "I work hard," Jennifer said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I contribute to this household. I've never done anything inappropriate at my job." "You exist at my discretion," Bobby repeated, pressing closer. "Your job exists because I haven't told your mother that how unsuitable it is for a young woman to be handling male animals, being touched by male veterinarians, exposing yourself to the kind of men who might misinterpret your natural friendliness." The threat was clear now. Bobby wasn't just accusing her of inappropriate behavior. He was threatening to convince Linda that Jennifer's job was somehow compromising her morality, that working at the veterinary clinic exposed her to dangerous influences that required parental intervention. He was creating a narrative that would justify removing her from the one place where she felt competent and valued. "Dr. Chen is expecting me," Jennifer said, making one last attempt to escape this conversation and get to the sanctuary of work. "If I'm late, she'll worry." "Dr. Chen," Bobby repeated thoughtfully. "Another person filling your head with ideas about your potential, your future, your options.
Another person who doesn't understand that you already have everything you need right here. The way he said Dr. Chen's name made it clear that Jennifer's mentor wasn't safe from Bobby's expanding sphere of control. If he decided that Dr. Chen was a negative influence, he'd find ways to interfere with that relationship too. Jennifer realized with growing horror that Bobby's control wasn't just about her current situation. He was systematically identifying and planning to eliminate every person and opportunity that might offer her alternatives to complete dependence on his household. "I have to go," Jennifer said, desperation creeping into her voice. Bobby studied her face for a long moment, and Jennifer saw something shift in his expression. The rage was still there, but it was being joined by something else, a cold satisfaction, as if he'd seen exactly the fear response he'd been looking for. "You'll go," he said finally, stepping back just enough to allow her to open the door. "But we're not finished with this conversation. Tonight, after dinner, you and I are going to have a much longer discussion about respect, gratitude, and your future in this family." Jennifer fumbled with the door handle, her hands shaking as she finally managed to open it. The cool morning air felt like salvation, but Bobby's final words followed her onto the front porch. "And Jennifer, if you're thinking about discussing our conversation with anyone at work, remember that everything you value, your job, your room, your place in this family, exists because I allow it. Some conversations are better kept private." As Jennifer walked to her car on unsteady legs, she realized that the ordinary world she'd been living in had just shattered completely. Bobby had revealed the true extent of his control over her life, had claimed ownership of her father's legacy, and had made clear that her continued existence in any form recognizable as independence was conditional on her complete submission to his will. But he'd also made a crucial mistake. For the first time in 10 years of gradual manipulation and control, Bobby had been completely honest about his intentions. And honesty, Jennifer was about to discover, could be a weapon that cut both ways.
Jennifer's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel of the 10-year-old Honda Civic, the car Bobby had reminded her he allowed her to drive. The 20-minute commute to the veterinary clinic had never felt longer. Every red light gave her mind more time to spiral through the implications of Bobby's morning revelation. Her father's insurance money, gone. Her financial independence and illusion. Her job, apparently subject to Bobby's approval and potentially in jeopardy. By the time she pulled into the clinic's parking lot, Jennifer had made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She had to tell someone what was happening. The isolation that had been Bobby's most effective weapon was also his greatest vulnerability. If she could find just one person who understood the reality of her situation, maybe she wouldn't feel so powerless. Dr. Sarah Chen was already in the clinic when Jennifer arrived, reviewing charts for the day's surgeries. At 52, Dr. Chen had built her practice from nothing, working 16-hour days for the first decade to establish her reputation in the competitive Denver veterinary market. She'd seen Jennifer's potential from the first day and had been subtly mentoring her ever since, lending her veterinary textbooks and encouraging her to shadow procedures whenever possible. "You're early," Dr. Chen observed, looking up from a German Shepherd's pre-surgical blood work. "And you look like you haven't slept. Everything okay at home?" The simple question nearly broke Jennifer's carefully maintained composure. Dr. Chen's genuine concern was such a stark contrast to the toxic atmosphere she'd just escaped that Jennifer felt tears threatening for the first time in months. "I need to ask you something," Jennifer said, closing the office door behind her. "Hypothetically, if someone was trapped in a situation at home where they couldn't leave because of finances and the people they lived with were controlling, what options might that person have?" Dr. Chen set down the chart and gave Jennifer her full attention. In her years of practice, she'd treated enough animals who'd been abused to recognize the signs of trauma, and some of those same signs were written across Jennifer's face this morning. "This hypothetical person," Dr. Chen said carefully, "are they in physical danger?" Not yet,"
Jennifer replied, then immediately questioned her own words. Bobby's behavior this morning had felt like a threat, but he hadn't actually touched her. Was she overreacting? Was this the kind of normal family conflict that everyone experiences and she was just too sheltered to understand that? Jennifer, Dr. Chen said gently, hypothetical questions usually aren't hypothetical. If someone you know is being controlled or threatened, there are resources available. The Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a 24-hour hotline. There are shelters, legal advocates, financial assistance programs. But what if the person doesn't have anywhere to go? What if they don't have any money saved or family to help them or job skills that would let them support themselves independently? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, and Jennifer could see her putting pieces together. Jennifer's reluctance to discuss her home life, her habit of deflecting personal questions, her obvious intelligence combined with her lack of educational opportunities, it was painting a picture that Dr. Chen was beginning to understand. The person we're discussing, Dr. Chen said slowly, do they have job skills in veterinary care? Jennifer's heart skipped. Was Dr. Chen offering her something? Hope flickered for just a moment before reality crashed back down. Even if they did, they'd need references, and if the people controlling them found out they were looking for other work, what if the reference came from someone who already knew their work? Someone who could offer them a position that included housing assistance. The offer hung in the air between them, so generous and unexpected that Jennifer almost couldn't process it. Dr. Chen was essentially offering her a way out, a job with enough support to achieve independence. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, Jennifer's mind immediately jumped to the obstacles. Bobby would never let me move out, she said, forgetting to maintain the hypothetical pretense. He controls all the finances, and he made it clear this morning that everything I have exists because he allows it. My job, my car, my place in the family, all of it depends on his permission. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Jennifer, what you're describing isn't normal family dynamics. Adults don't need permission from step-parents to make life choices. The fact that he's convinced you otherwise is a major red flag. But legally, don't I? I live in his house, drive his car, contribute to a household budget he manages. If I tried to leave, he could report the car stolen, couldn't he? Or kick me out with nothing? These were the questions that had kept Jennifer awake countless nights, the legal and practical barriers that made her situation feel impossible to escape. She had researched her options online during brief moments at work, but every solution seemed to require resources she didn't have, or risk making her situation worse. Dr. Chan pulled out a legal pad and began writing. First, if you're 22 and not legally incapacitated, no one can prevent you from leaving. Second, if you've been contributing to household expenses and have documentation of that, you have tenant rights even without a formal lease. Third, if the car is titled in your name or you can prove you've been making payments, it's not theft to take it.
But I don't have documentation, Jennifer said, feeling stupid for not having thought of these things sooner. Bobby handles all the banking. I sign my paychecks over to him, and he gives me cash for personal expenses. I don't even know what bills I'm supposedly contributing to. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the clinic's other employees and the first clients of the day. Jennifer had to switch into professional mode, greeting pet owners and assisting with appointments, while her mind churned through everything Dr. Chen had told her. For the first time in years, independence seemed like a theoretical possibility rather than an impossible fantasy. But theory and practice were different things entirely, and as the morning progressed, Jennifer found herself cataloging all the ways her situation was more complicated than Dr. Chen understood. There was Linda to consider. Despite everything, Jennifer loved her mother and couldn't bear the thought of abandoning her to Bobby's increasingly erratic behavior. Linda had been genuinely happy when she'd married Bobby, and Jennifer's departure might trigger retaliation against her mother. What if Bobby blamed Linda for Jennifer's ingratitude and disrespect? Then there were the practical concerns. Jennifer had no credit history, no bank account in her own name, no legal address separate from Bobby's house.
Even if Dr. Chen offered her housing assistance, landlords typically required references, security deposits, and proof of income that Jennifer couldn't provide. The bureaucratic barriers to independence were as daunting as the financial ones. Most troubling of all was Jennifer's growing realization that she might be the problem. Bobby's accusations about her behavior at work had felt completely unfair, but what if she was naive about professional boundaries? What if her interactions with male colleagues really were inappropriate and she was too inexperienced to recognize it? What if Bobby's particular ways were actually normal household management and she was ungrateful and immature for resenting them? The self-doubt was paralyzing. If Jennifer couldn't trust her own perceptions of her situation, how could she make major life decisions? What if she destroyed her family's stability and her mother's happiness based on misunderstandings and teenage rebellion she should have outgrown years ago? During her lunch break, Jennifer tried to call the domestic violence hotline Dr. Chen had mentioned. She dialed the number 3 times before hanging up, unable to find words to describe her situation. Was she being controlled, or was she living in a normal family with reasonable expectations? Was Bobby's behavior threatening, or was she overreacting to standard stepfather concerns about her choices? The counselor who finally answered her 4th attempt was patient and understanding, but her questions made Jennifer feel even more confused. Has he ever hit you? No, but Jennifer wasn't sure if that meant she wasn't really being abused. Does he prevent you from leaving the house? Not explicitly, but Jennifer knew there would be consequences for unexplained absences. Are you afraid of him? Yes, but Jennifer wasn't sure if her fear was justified or if she was being dramatic. It sounds like you're experiencing emotional and financial abuse, the counselor said gently. Those are real forms of domestic violence, and they often escalate to physical violence over time. But even this validation felt uncertain to Jennifer. If emotional and financial abuse were so difficult to identify, how could she be sure that's what she was experiencing? Maybe Bobby was just a strict stepfather. Maybe her discomfort with his checking on her was her own problem. Maybe his control over finances was responsible household management rather than abuse. By the time her shift ended, Jennifer had talked herself out of taking any immediate action. Dr. Chen's offer was generous, but it felt premature. She needed to be absolutely certain about her situation before making decisions that would affect her mother's marriage and potentially destroy the only family stability Linda had found since Jennifer's father's death. The drive home felt like traveling toward her own execution. Bobby's promise of a longer conversation hung over her like a sword, and Jennifer found herself driving slower and slower, taking unnecessary detours through residential neighborhoods, delaying the inevitable confrontation. When she finally pulled into the driveway, Bobby's truck was already there, and she could see him through the kitchen window waiting for her return. The sight of him made her stomach clench with anxiety, but it also crystallized something important in her mind. She was afraid of him, not afraid of disappointing him or causing family conflict, but genuinely afraid of what he might do if she continued to resist his control. That fear wasn't normal, and it wasn't something she should have to live with. But knowing she shouldn't have to accept the situation and knowing how to change it were entirely different challenges, and as Jennifer sat in the driveway gathering courage to face whatever Bobby had planned for the evening, she realized that her resistance was about to be tested in ways she'd never imagined.
The dinner table felt like a courtroom, with Bobby serving as judge, jury, and prosecutor all rolled into one. Linda had prepared Jennifer's favorite meal, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, but the food sat untouched on Jennifer's plate as Bobby outlined what he called the new family expectations. From now on, Bobby announced, cutting his meatloaf with deliberate precision, Jennifer will be contributing more meaningfully to this household. Her work schedule will be adjusted to prioritize family responsibilities. Linda nodded along, though Jennifer caught flickers of uncertainty in her mother's eyes. "What kind of adjustments?" Linda asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Jennifer will work part-time instead of full-time at the clinic. The extra time will be spent helping with household management, taking on more domestic responsibilities,
and focusing on developing skills that will benefit her future family. Jennifer's fork clattered against her plate. You can't just decide to cut my work hours. Dr. Chen is depending on me. We have surgery scheduled, patients who need follow-up care. Bobby's smile was cold and patronizing. Dr. Chen will understand that family comes first, and if she doesn't, then perhaps it's time for you to find employment that better aligns with family values. The threat was clear: comply with Bobby's new restrictions or lose her job entirely. Jennifer felt the walls of her world closing in, but something inside her rebelled against the casual way Bobby was dismantling her life while Linda sat silently, allowing it to happen. No, Jennifer said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Bobby stopped chewing, his eyes narrowing as he processed what he'd heard. Excuse me? No, Jennifer repeated, louder this time. I won't quit my job. I won't reduce my hours, and I won't pretend that what you're doing is normal family management. Bobby's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Linda intervened with nervous laughter. Jennifer, honey, I think you're misunderstanding. Bobby's just trying to help you develop a more balanced lifestyle. Working so much isn't healthy for someone your age. Stop, Mom. Jennifer turned to face Linda directly. You know this isn't about my health or my work-life balance. Bobby is trying to control every aspect of my life, and you're helping him do it. Linda's fork froze halfway to her mouth. In 10 years of marriage to Bobby, Jennifer had never spoken so directly about the family dynamics, never forced Linda to confront the reality of what was happening in their house. That's enough, Bobby said, his voice dangerously quiet. You will not speak to your mother that way. You will not disrespect this family with your ungrateful attitude, and you will absolutely not make accusations about my motives. Then what are your motives? Jennifer challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. Why do you need to control my work schedule? Why do you need to monitor my conversations and approve my friendships? Why do you get to decide how I spend money that originally belonged to my father? The last question hit its target. Bobby's composure cracked, and Jennifer saw raw fury flash across his features before he regained control. Your father is dead, Bobby said with brutal simplicity. I am the man who stepped up to provide for his family when he couldn't. I am the man who has given you a home, food, transportation, and opportunities for 10 years. And if you can't show basic gratitude for those sacrifices, then maybe it's time you learned what life looks like without them. Linda's face went pale. Bobby, please, she's just upset. She means every word, Bobby interrupted, never taking his eyes off Jennifer. Don't you, Jennifer? You've been planning this little rebellion for a while now. Probably talking to people at work about how terrible your family is, how oppressed you feel, how much you deserve better than what we've provided. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Jennifer had been considering confiding in Dr. Chen, had been wondering if other people would see her situation as abnormal. But Bobby's framing made those thoughts sound manipulative and ungrateful, rather than reasonable attempts to seek perspective. I just want to understand why I need permission to live my own life. Because you're not living your own life. You're living in my house, eating my food, driving my car, working at a job and a community where my reputation matters. Everything you do reflects on this family, and I won't have you embarrassing us with your selfish choices.
Linda flinched at Bobby's raised voice, and Jennifer saw something she'd never noticed before. Her mother was afraid too. Linda's quick glances between Bobby and Jennifer, her nervous fidgeting with her napkin, the way she seemed to shrink in her chair when Bobby's temper flared. These weren't the behaviors of a happy wife supporting her husband's reasonable expectations. Mom, Jennifer said urgently, you see this, right? You see that this isn't normal. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Jennifer thought her mother might finally acknowledge what was happening in their house. But when Linda spoke, her words shattered that hope completely. Jennifer, I need you to apologize to Bobby, Linda said, her voice shaking. I need you to thank him for everything he's done for us, and I need you to promise that you'll be more respectful going forward. The betrayal was complete. Linda wasn't just enabling Bobby's control. She was actively reinforcing it, demanding that Jennifer participate in her own oppression to maintain the illusion of family harmony. I'm not apologizing, Jennifer said, standing up from the table, and I'm not reducing my work hours. If that's unacceptable to you, then maybe I should start looking for somewhere else to live. The words were out before Jennifer could stop them, and she realized that she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd directly challenged Bobby's authority and rejected Linda's attempts at mediation. There would be consequences for this defiance, and they would come soon. Bobby stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and threatening. You want to look for somewhere else to live? Be my guest. But you'll leave with exactly what you brought to this family 10 years ago. Nothing. No car, no money, no references, no support. Just the clothes on your back and the attitude that's gotten you into the situation. The clothes on my back that you paid for? Jennifer shot back, her fear transforming into reckless anger. With my father's insurance money? Money that was supposed to be for my education and my future? Linda gasped, and Jennifer realized that her mother hadn't known about Bobby's financial revelations from that morning. She had believed, apparently, that the insurance money was still safely saved for Jennifer's future, while Bobby had been spending it to maintain their lifestyle and presenting himself as the family's generous provider. Limba, why don't you go upstairs while Jennifer and I finish our conversation? No, Linda said, with more firmness than Jennifer had heard from her in years. If you've been using Michael's insurance money, I need to know about it. That money was specifically designated for Jennifer's education. Bobby's mask slipped completely. The charming, concerned stepfather disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating, who had apparently been lying to both of them about the family's financial situation. I used that money to keep this family afloat while you recovered from surgery. I used it to pay for Jennifer's food, clothing, and shelter for 10 years. I used it to maintain the house Michael left you, to keep the cars running, to provide the stability you both needed after your tragedy. My tragedy? Linda repeated, her voice barely audible. Our tragedy, Bobby corrected. But the damage was done. He'd revealed that he'd never really considered himself part of their original family. He'd positioned himself as the savior of Linda and Jennifer's tragedy, entitled to compensation for his charitable efforts. I watched my mother's face as the reality of their situation sank in. Linda had sacrificed her daughter's financial independence and educational opportunities to maintain a marriage with a man who saw their grief and vulnerability as debts he could collect on indefinitely. I want to see the bank statements, Linda said quietly. You want to see the bank statements? After 10 years of marriage, you're going to question my financial management because your ungrateful daughter is having a tantrum? Show me the statements, Bobby. The simple request seemed to deflate Bobby's rage, replacing it with something more dangerous, the calculating look of someone whose lies were being exposed and who was already planning his next move. Fine, he said. We'll all look at the statements together. But afterwards, Jennifer, you're going to make a choice. You can accept that this family operates according to my judgment and my rules, with appropriate gratitude for everything I've provided, or you can leave immediately and permanently. No middle ground, no negotiation, no trial periods. Jennifer felt the weight of the ultimatum settling over her like a physical burden. Bobby was forcing her to choose between complete submission and total exile, gambling that her fear of independence would override her desire for freedom. But something had shifted during their confrontation. Jennifer had seen Linda's shock at learning about the insurance money, had witnessed her mother's first real challenge to Bobby's authority in years, and had discovered that speaking truth about their situation didn't immediately result in catastrophic consequences. I need to think about it, Jennifer said. You have until morning, Bobby replied. Tomorrow, you'll either call Dr. Chen and reduce your hours to part-time, or you'll pack your belongings and leave permanently. Your choice.
Jennifer didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by her bedroom window watching the streetlights flicker through the maple trees, mentally preparing for a conversation that would change everything. By 4 a.m., she'd made her decision. By 5 a.m., she'd written 3 letters, one to Dr. Chen, one to her mother, and one to Bobby. By 5:30, she was dressed and walking quietly down the hallway toward what felt like the first day of her real life. She left the letters on the kitchen counter and drove to the clinic 2 hours before her shift started, knowing that Dr. Chen often arrived early to check on overnight patients. The empty parking lot felt like a sanctuary, and when Dr. Chen's SUV pulled in 20 minutes later, Jennifer was ready. "I want to take you up on your offer," Jennifer said, before Dr. Chen had even unlocked the clinic door. "I want to work toward independence, but I need help figuring out how to do it safely." Dr. Chen studied Jennifer's face in the parking lot lamplight, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "What happened after we talked yesterday?" Jennifer handed her a copy of the letter she'd left for Bobby. Dr. Chen read it silently, her expression growing more serious with each paragraph. "Bobby, I've decided to accept Dr. Chen's offer of full-time employment with housing assistance. I'll be moving out within the next 2 weeks. I understand this will disappoint you and Mom, but I need to start building an independent life. I'm grateful for the home you've provided, but I can't continue living under restrictions that prevent me from growing into the adult I'm meant to become. I hope someday you'll understand that this decision comes from my need for self-respect, not from ingratitude. Jennifer." "This is brave," Dr. Chen said finally, "but you're right to be concerned about safety. Leaving an abusive situation is often the most dangerous time for someone in your position." The word abusive still felt foreign to Jennifer, but she was beginning to accept that her discomfort with the label didn't make it inaccurate. Over the next several hours, as they prepared the clinic for the day's appointments, Dr. Chen became Jennifer's crash course instructor in practical independence. "First priority is documentation," Dr. Chen explained, while reviewing the morning surgery schedule. "From today forward, you keep records of everything: your work hours, your contributions to household expenses, any interactions with Bobby that make you feel unsafe. Use your phone to photograph important documents and email copies to yourself at an account he doesn't know about." Jennifer created a new email address during her lunch break, using her middle name, Emily, and her father's surname, White, emily.white.denver@gmail.com. The simple act of having a digital identity separate from Bobby's scrutiny felt revolutionary. Dr. Chen also introduced Jennifer to Amanda Porres, a legal advocate who volunteered with the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Amanda met them at a coffee shop near the clinic after Jennifer's shift, bringing with her a folder full of information that transformed Jennifer's understanding of her rights and options. Colorado has strong tenant protection laws. Even without a formal lease, if you've been living somewhere for more than 30 days and contributing to expenses, you have legal standing. Bobby can't just throw you out without proper notice. "But what if he claims the car belongs to him?" Jennifer asked. Amanda pulled out a tablet and began accessing state databases. "What's the VIN number? We can check the title right now." Jennifer provided the information from memory, and within minutes, Amanda had located the vehicle registration. "The car is titled in your name and your mother's name jointly. Bobby has no legal claim to the vehicle." This revelation was stunning to Jennifer. For years, she'd believed that everything she used, the car, her bedroom, even her clothes, belonged to Bobby and existed at his discretion. Learning that she had legal rights to the vehicle felt like discovering she had superpowers. "What about money? I've been endorsing my paychecks to a household account, but I don't have access to any individual savings." "Do you have copies of those endorsed checks?" Amanda asked. Jennifer shook her head, feeling naive for not having thought to document her financial contributions. "That's okay. Your employer will have records of your wages, and if you've been endorsing checks to a joint account, there's a paper trail. We can subpoena bank records if necessary. But first, let's focus on immediate safety planning." Amanda opened a notebook and began sketching out what she called a safety timeline.
a step-by-step plan for Jennifer's transition to independence that minimized risks while maximizing her legal protections. Phase 1 is preparation. Gather important documents, establish independent financial accounts, secure temporary housing, and document any threatening behavior. Phase 2 is execution, actually leaving, preferably when Bobby isn't home. Phase 3 is protection, making sure you have legal and physical safety measures in place for the transition period. Dr. Chen had been listening intently, and now she added her own practical suggestions. The clinic has a small apartment above the office that we use for overnight monitoring of critical patients. It's not luxurious, but it's furnished and secure. You could stay there temporarily while we work out something more permanent. The generosity was overwhelming, but it also highlighted how much Jennifer had to learn about accepting help from people who didn't expect anything in return. Bobby's version of assistance always came with strings attached, obligations that increased his control over her life. Dr. Chen and Amanda were offering support that seemed designed to increase Jennifer's independence rather than their own power.
Over the following days, Jennifer began implementing Amanda's safety plan while maintaining the appearance of normal routine at home. She photographed her birth certificate, social security card, and high school diploma during a lunch break when Linda was at work. She opened a checking account at a credit union across town using Dr. Chen's clinic as her mailing address. She researched Colorado's domestic violence laws and learned about protective orders, tenant rights, and financial abuse protections. Most importantly, she began documenting everything. Every controlling conversation with Bobby, every time he entered her room without permission, every financial demand or threat, every instance of Linda's complicity in his control, all of it went into detailed notes on her hidden email account. The documentation process was eye-opening in unexpected ways. Seeing her experiences written down objectively, Jennifer could recognize patterns of behavior that seemed obviously abusive when viewed from an outside perspective. Bobby's actions weren't random outbursts of temper or occasional poor judgment. They were systematic efforts to maintain dominance through fear, financial dependency, and social isolation. Dr. Chen also connected Jennifer with other women who'd escaped controlling relationships. During a coffee meeting arranged through the Domestic Violence Coalition, Jennifer met Rachel Martinez, a nurse who'd left her husband 2 years earlier, and Susan Kim, a teacher who'd divorced her controlling partner and rebuilt her life with her 2 children. "The hardest part isn't leaving," Rachel explained. "The hardest part is trusting yourself after years of someone else defining reality for you. You'll second-guess every decision for months, wondering if you're being too sensitive or too dramatic." Susan nodded in agreement. "I spent the first year constantly checking with my therapist about whether my ex-husband's behavior was really abusive or if I was just bad at relationships. It takes time to recalibrate your normal meter." These conversations were revelatory for Jennifer. She wasn't uniquely weak or ungrateful. She was experiencing something that happened to thousands of women, something with recognizable patterns and established recovery paths. Her confusion about Bobby's behavior wasn't evidence of her own inadequacy. It was a normal response to systematic psychological manipulation. Dr. Chen had also been strategically increasing Jennifer's responsibilities at the clinic, teaching her advanced procedures and encouraging her to interact with pharmaceutical representatives, equipment vendors, and other veterinarians. These interactions helped Jennifer realize that she was capable of professional relationships that didn't require her to minimize herself or accept inappropriate treatment. "You have natural leadership abilities," Dr. Martinez from the emergency animal hospital told her during a consultation about a complex surgery. "Have you ever considered applying to veterinary school? With your experience and Dr. Chen's recommendation, you'd be a strong candidate." The suggestion would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier, but Jennifer was beginning to understand that her limitations had been artificially imposed rather than naturally occurring. She was competent, intelligent, and capable of much more than Bobby's household management roles would ever allow her to demonstrate. Meanwhile, the tension at home was escalating in subtle but unmistakable ways.
Bobby had become hyper-vigilant about Jennifer's activities, questioning her about every conversation at work and demanding detailed explanations for any variation in her routine. He'd also begun making comments about Dr. Chen's inappropriate influence on Jennifer's attitude and suggesting that the veterinary clinic was exposing her to unwholesome ideas about women's roles in society. Linda seemed torn between her loyalty to Bobby and her growing awareness that something was wrong with their family dynamics. She'd begun asking Jennifer careful questions about her work and her future plans, conversations that felt like tentative attempts to reconnect with her daughter, while avoiding direct confrontation with Bobby's authority. "I found some college brochures in your room," Linda said one evening while they were cleaning dishes together. "Are you thinking about going back to school?" "Maybe," Jennifer replied cautiously, unsure if this was a supportive conversation or an intelligence-gathering mission for Bobby. "Your father always wanted you to get a degree," Linda said quietly. "He used to talk about how proud he'd be to see you graduate." The mention of her father was both comforting and heartbreaking. Jennifer realized that Linda still remembered the dreams they'd shared before Bobby's influence had reshaped their family's priorities. "What do you think Dad would say about our situation now?" Jennifer asked carefully. Linda was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "I think," she said finally, "he'd want you to be happy. And I think he'd want me to remember who I was before I got so scared of being alone." It was the closest Linda had ever come to acknowledging that Bobby's control wasn't normal or healthy, and Jennifer felt a spark of hope that her mother might be willing to examine their family dynamics more honestly. But that hope was tempered by the knowledge that Linda's financial dependence on Bobby was even more complete than Jennifer's. At 54, with limited job skills and 10 years out of the workforce, Linda's options for independence were genuinely limited. Even if she recognized the problems in her marriage, she might not feel capable of addressing them. As Jennifer prepared for bed that night, she realized that her journey toward independence would require more than just escaping Bobby's control. She would need to learn to trust her own judgment, how to build relationships that weren't based on dependency or control, and how to create a life that honored both her own needs and the memory of the father who'd wanted something better for her. The path forward was becoming clearer, but Jennifer was about to discover that knowledge and preparation weren't enough to protect her from Bobby's escalating determination to maintain control at any cost.
3 weeks after Jennifer had started building her escape plan, everything collapsed in a single afternoon. She was returning from a lunch meeting with Amanda Torres, where they'd finalized the paperwork for her new bank account and reviewed the lease agreement for a studio apartment near the clinic, when she found Bobby's truck parked at an angle in their driveway, the kind of reckless parking that suggested he'd arrived in a hurry and in a rage. The front door was standing open, which was never allowed in Bobby's meticulously controlled household. Jennifer could hear raised voices from inside, her mother's pleading tone mixed with Bobby's furious shouting, and underneath it all, the sound of things being thrown or broken. Jennifer's new phone, the one she'd purchased with her own money and kept hidden from Bobby, buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Jennifer, I just had a very disturbing conversation with someone claiming to be your stepfather. Please call me as soon as you get this message." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Somehow, Bobby had discovered her plans. Somehow, he'd learned about the apartment, the bank account, the support network she'd been building. And now he was inside their house, destroying whatever he could reach while Linda tried unsuccessfully to calm him down. Jennifer parked at the end of the block and called Dr. Chen from the safety of distance. "Jennifer, thank God." Dr. Chen answered immediately. "A man called the clinic claiming to be your guardian. He said you'd been stealing money from your family and using our clinic to meet men inappropriately. He demanded that I fire you immediately and promised to press charges for theft if I didn't comply." "Did you—" Jennifer's voice caught. "Did you fire me?" "Of course not. But Jennifer, he knew details about your work schedule, about our conversation yesterday, about the apartment we discussed. Someone's been monitoring your activities very closely."
Jennifer closed her eyes, trying to think through how Bobby could have gathered so much information. She'd been careful about her phone usage, had created new email accounts, had met with Amanda and Dr. Chen away from the house, but Bobby was more resourceful than she'd given him credit for. He also threatened to report Dr. Martinez and me to the veterinary licensing board for allegedly exposing you to inappropriate working conditions. He's claiming we've been manipulating you against your family and interfering with parental authority. The sophistication of Bobby's counterattack was breathtaking. He wasn't just trying to control Jennifer, he was systematically attacking every person who'd helped her, using legal threats and professional consequences to isolate her from her support network. "I'm so sorry," Jennifer said. "I never meant for this to affect you or the clinic." "Don't apologize for seeking help," Dr. Chen said firmly, "but we need to adjust our approach. This level of retaliation suggests that your stepfather sees your independence as a genuine threat to his control." Jennifer ended the call and sat in her car, watching her house from a distance while trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Bobby had somehow discovered her plans and was now actively sabotaging them, threatening not just her own future, but the careers and reputations of people who'd tried to help her. A police car pulled into her driveway, and Jennifer watched 2 officers approach her front door. Linda emerged to speak with them, her body language suggesting distress but not immediate danger. After 10 minutes of conversation, the officers left without entering the house, and Jennifer realized that Bobby had managed to present whatever had happened inside as a family dispute, rather than anything requiring police intervention. Her phone rang, Linda calling from inside the house. "Jennifer, you need to come home right now. We need to discuss what you've been doing behind our backs." "What did Bobby tell the police?" "He told them you've been stealing from the family and planning to run away with money that doesn't belong to you. He showed them bank statements proving that your paychecks have been supporting household expenses, and he explained that you've been secretly meeting with people who are encouraging you to abandon your family obligations." The twisted version of events was almost impressive in its manipulation effects. Bobby had reframed Jennifer's escape planning as theft, her support network as manipulative outsiders, and her desire for independence as abandonment of family duty. He'd positioned himself as the responsible guardian, trying to protect both his household and the community from Jennifer's alleged deceptive behavior. "Mom, you know that's not true," Jennifer said. "I know you've been lying to us," Linda replied, and Jennifer could hear Bobby coaching her in the background. "I know you've been meeting with strangers and making plans to leave without discussing them with your family. I know you opened a bank account using the clinic's address, which looks like you're trying to hide assets."
Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Bobby had taken Jennifer's careful legal preparation for independence and twisted it into evidence of dishonesty and criminal intent. Worse, he'd convinced Linda to participate in this reframing, making Jennifer's own mother complicit in sabotaging her escape plans. "I opened that account with my own money," Jennifer said. "Money I earned at my job." "Money you earned while living in our house, eating our food, driving our car," Linda replied, the words clearly scripted by Bobby. Money that should have been contributed to family expenses instead of hidden away for selfish purposes. Jennifer realized that arguing with Linda was pointless. Bobby had had hours to craft his narrative and convince Linda that Jennifer's independence planning was actually betrayal and theft. Facts wouldn't matter in a conversation where the conclusions had already been determined. "I'm not coming home tonight," Jennifer said finally. "If you don't come home tonight, don't bother coming home at all," Linda replied, her voice breaking. "Bobby says we can't have someone in our house who's planning to steal from us and abandon us. If you choose strangers over family, then live with those strangers permanently." The line went dead, and Jennifer sat in her car feeling like she'd been physically gutted. In the span of a few hours, she'd lost her home, her relationship with her mother, and potentially her job. Bobby's retaliation had been swift, comprehensive, and devastatingly effective. She drove to the studio apartment she'd planned to rent, only to discover that the landlord had received a call from someone claiming to be her current landlord, warning that she was an unreliable tenant who'd destroyed property and stolen from previous households.
The rental application she'd submitted that morning was now worthless. Amanda Torres wasn't answering her phone, and when Jennifer finally reached her that evening, she learned why. "I'm sorry, Jennifer, but I can't continue as your advocate," Amanda said, her voice strained. "Someone filed a complaint with my employer claiming that I've been encouraging family destruction and interfering with parental rights. The complaint includes allegations that I've been coaching you to make false abuse claims." "But you haven't done any of that," Jennifer protested. "I know that, and you know that, but the investigation process could take months, and I can't risk my position helping other abuse victims while my own credibility is under question." Bobby had systematically attacked every element of Jennifer's support system within a single day. Dr. Chen was facing professional threats, Amanda was dealing with employment consequences, the apartment rental had been sabotaged, and Linda had been convinced to choose Bobby's version of events over her own daughter's well-being. Jennifer spent that night in a cheap motel near the highway, paying cash for a room that smelled like disinfectant and disappointment. She lay on the scratchy bedspread, staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to understand how her carefully planned escape had unraveled so completely. The worst part wasn't the practical setbacks. Those could potentially be overcome with time and persistence. The worst part was the isolation. Bobby had managed to portray Jennifer as the problem, the ungrateful daughter whose selfish choices were destroying a loving family. Even people who'd witnessed his controlling behavior might now question whether Jennifer's version of events was accurate or whether she was manipulating them for sympathy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jennifer, this is your last chance to come home and apologize for the chaos you've caused. Tomorrow, I'm filing a police report for theft of family resources and providing evidence of your deceptive behavior to your employer. You have 12 hours to choose between family loyalty and the consequences of your actions. Bobby." The message was a masterpiece of manipulation, framing Bobby's ultimatum as a generous final opportunity rather than a threat. He was giving her one last chance to submit completely to his control or face legal and professional consequences that would make independence impossible. Jennifer turned off her phone and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to the same terrible realization. Maybe Bobby was right. Maybe I was selfish and ungrateful. Maybe my desire for independence was actually destructive to people who'd tried to help me. Maybe I was the problem. As the neon motel sign flickered outside her window, casting red and blue shadows across the unfamiliar room, Jennifer felt further from freedom than she'd ever been. Bobby had demonstrated that his control extended far beyond their household, that he could weaponize her support network against her, and that her attempts at independence would have consequences for innocent people who tried to help. For the first time since she'd started planning her escape, Jennifer wondered if submission might be the only way to protect both herself and the people she cared about.
Jennifer spent 3 days in the motel room, existing on vending machine snacks and bottled water, before she realized she was replicating the same pattern of isolation and self-doubt that had kept her trapped at Bobby's house for years. The turning point came when she found herself apologizing to the housekeeping staff for existing in a space she'd paid for, the same automatic deference she'd learned to show Bobby to avoid conflict. "Honey, you don't need to apologize for being here," said Maria Santos, the housekeeper who'd been cleaning Jennifer's room. "You paid for this room. It's yours for as long as you need it." The simple statement hit Jennifer like lightning. She had paid for the room, with money she'd earned, from work she'd performed competently. She wasn't a charity case or a burden. She was a customer who'd purchased a service and had every right to occupy the space without apologizing for her existence. That realization led to others. Dr. Chen hadn't offered her help out of pity. She'd offered it because Jennifer was a valuable employee whose skills benefited the clinic. Amanda Torres hadn't volunteered her time because Jennifer was a victim worth saving. She'd provided advocacy because Jennifer deserved legal protection and professional support.
the apartment landlord hadn't considered her application because she was desperate. He'd reviewed it because she met the qualifications and had the financial resources to pay rent. Jennifer had been viewing herself through Bobby's lens for so long that she'd forgotten her own worth existed independently of his approval. She wasn't an ungrateful dependent living on Bobby's charity. She was a skilled professional whose labor had been systematically undervalued and whose inheritance had been stolen to fund the very control system that oppressed her. On Thursday morning, Jennifer called Dr. Chen and asked to meet before the clinic opened. "I want to come back to work, but I need to do it right this time. I need to understand exactly what Bobby can and can't do legally, and I need to stop letting his threats determine my choices." Dr. Chen pulled out a folder she'd clearly been assembling since Bobby's initial attack. "I've been doing research too. I spoke with our clinic's attorney about Bobby's threats to our licenses and his claims about inappropriate working conditions." "What did the attorney say?" "That Bobby has no legal standing to file complaints against our practice based on his objections to your employment. His threats about reporting us to licensing boards are essentially harassment, and if he follows through, we can pursue charges against him for filing false reports." Jennifer felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Bobby's professional threats, which had seemed so powerful and frightening, were actually legal vulnerabilities that could be turned against him. "I also spoke with Dr. Martinez. He was initially concerned about Bobby's accusations, but when I explained the context, he became very interested in helping. It turns out his wife works for the district attorney's office in the domestic violence unit." "What does that mean?" "It means we have access to legal expertise that Bobby doesn't know about, and it means his threats against our professional community might actually help build a case against him for harassment and intimidation." Jennifer began to see her situation from a completely different angle. Instead of being isolated and vulnerable, she was part of a professional community that had resources, legal knowledge, and collective power. Bobby's attacks on her support network hadn't just failed, they'd actually expanded that network by involving people with legal and professional expertise. Dr. Chen also shared research she'd done about financial abuse and inheritance theft. What Bobby did with your father's insurance money isn't just morally wrong, it's potentially criminal. If Linda was the beneficiary and Bobby used the money for purposes other than your care and education without proper legal documentation, that could constitute fraud. But Linda agreed to combine their finances when they got married. Agreeing to combine marital assets isn't the same as agreeing to spend a minor child's inheritance on household expenses. Linda may not have had the legal authority to make that decision without court approval, especially if the insurance policy specifically designated the money for your education. Jennifer had never considered that her mother might have been manipulated into making financial decisions that weren't legally valid. She'd assumed that Linda's choices as an adult automatically carried legal weight. But apparently, there were protections for inheritance money that couldn't be overridden by parental decisions. What would it take to find out what really happened to the money? Bank records, insurance documents, and possibly depositions from Linda and Bobby about how financial decisions were made during your minority. It's not simple, but it's absolutely doable if you're willing to pursue it. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call to the clinic's main line. Dr. Chen answered, and she watched her expression grow increasingly serious as she listened to the caller. "I see. And you're certain about the timeline?" "Thank you for calling. We'll take appropriate precautions." She hung up and turned to Jennifer with concern. "That was Officer Patricia Williams from the Lakewood Police Department. She wanted to warn us that Bobby filed a missing person report yesterday, claiming you've been kidnapped or coerced by our clinic staff." Jennifer's mouth fell open. "Kidnapped?"
According to his report, you haven't been home in 3 days, you're not answering your phone, and the last people to see you were employees of our clinic who've been filling your head with anti-family propaganda. He's positioning himself as a concerned parent whose daughter has been led astray by manipulative outsiders. The brilliance of Bobby's strategy was terrifying. By filing a missing person report,
He'd forced the police to investigate Jennifer's whereabouts while simultaneously creating an official record that portrayed her support network as potential criminals. When Jennifer eventually surfaced, Bobby could claim that his accusations about manipulation and coercion had been validated by her disappearance. "Officer Williams wanted to know if we'd seen you," Dr. Chen continued. "I told her you're safe and that we'd encourage you to contact the police directly to clarify the situation." Jennifer realized that she was facing a choice she'd never anticipated. She could continue hiding, allowing Bobby to control the narrative about her disappearance and potentially causing legal problems for Dr. Chen, or she could contact the police herself, but doing so would reveal her location and make her vulnerable to Bobby's next phase of retaliation. "What if I call them?" Jennifer asked. "What if I explain that I left voluntarily and that no one kidnapped me?" "Then you'd be taking control of the narrative instead of letting Bobby define it," Dr. Chen replied. "But you'd also be acknowledging publicly that you've left home, which might trigger whatever consequences Bobby has planned for that scenario." Jennifer thought about the text message from Bobby, his promise to file theft charges and destroy her employment prospects if she didn't return home and apologize. Contacting the police would essentially guarantee that Bobby would follow through on those threats. But it would also guarantee that there would be an official record of Jennifer's voluntary departure and Bobby's false accusations. Instead of being portrayed as a missing person who might have been coerced, she could establish herself as an adult making independent choices despite family opposition. "I want to call them," Jennifer decided, "but I want to do it properly. I want to understand my legal rights first, and I want to have documentation of Bobby's threats and financial abuse before I make any official statements." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Dr. Martinez's wife, Elena Martinez, works in the DA's domestic violence unit. She offered to meet with you this afternoon to discuss your legal options and help you prepare for any conversations with police. "Why would she help me? She doesn't even know me." "Because domestic violence advocates understand that abusers like Bobby rely on their victims feeling isolated and helpless. Every time someone like you finds the courage to seek help and document abuse, it makes the community safer for other potential victims." That afternoon, Jennifer met Elena Martinez at the district attorney's office, an imposing building downtown that made Jennifer feel both protected and intimidated. Elena was younger than Jennifer had expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an intensity that suggested she took her work very personally. "I've reviewed the information Dr. Chen provided," Elena said, spreading Jennifer's documented experiences across a conference table. "What you're describing is textbook financial and emotional abuse, with escalating controlling behaviors that suggest high risk for physical violence." "But he's never actually hit me," Jennifer said, still struggling with the disconnect between her experience and the legal definitions of abuse. Physical violence is only one form of domestic abuse. Financial control, social isolation, threats, intimidation, invasion of privacy, and restricting someone's freedom of movement are all recognized forms of abuse under Colorado law. Elena pulled out a legal pad and began asking detailed questions about Jennifer's experiences with Bobby. As Jennifer answered, Elena took notes and occasionally asked for clarification or additional details. The process felt like a medical examination, systematic and thorough, but it was also validating in a way Jennifer hadn't expected. "Based on what you've told me, we have grounds for both criminal charges and civil protections. The misuse of your inheritance money could constitute fraud, especially if Linda didn't have legal authority to redirect those funds. Bobby's threats against your employer and his false police report could support harassment charges." "What about the missing person report?" "We'll clear that up immediately. I'll contact Officer Williams directly and explain that you left voluntarily and that Bobby's report was filed under false pretenses. That actually strengthens your case because filing false police reports is a crime." Jennifer felt something shifting inside her.
a fundamental change in how she understood her situation. She wasn't a powerless victim of circumstances beyond her control. She was someone whose rights had been violated by people who'd counted on her not knowing those rights existed. "What happens next?" Jennifer asked. "Next, you decide how far you want to pursue this legally. We can seek a restraining order that would prevent Bobby from contacting you or your employer. We can pursue criminal charges for the financial fraud and harassment. We can help you recover assets that were obtained using your inheritance money. Or we can simply ensure you have legal protection while you rebuild your life independently. What would you recommend?" Elena's expression was serious. "I'd recommend documenting everything, pursuing the restraining order immediately, and then deciding about criminal charges once you're safe and stable. Bobby's behavior is escalating, and people like him typically don't accept the loss of control gracefully." As Jennifer left the district attorney's office that evening, she realized that her perspective on the past 3 days had been completely wrong. What she'd seen as devastating setbacks were actually Bobby's desperate attempts to maintain control over a situation that was already slipping away from him. His threats had legal consequences for him, not for her. His manipulation of Linda was documentation of his abusive behavior, not evidence of Jennifer's wrongdoing. Most importantly, Jennifer realized that Bobby's power over her had always been based on her belief that she had no alternatives. Once she understood her legal rights, her professional value, and her inheritance rights, his control became an illusion that could be shattered by her refusal to participate in it. She was no longer the powerless girl who'd stood trapped against the front door while Bobby outlined his ownership of her life. She was an adult woman with legal rights, professional skills, and a support network that was more robust than Bobby's efforts to destroy it. The breakthrough wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional and spiritual. Jennifer finally understood that seeking help wasn't selfish, that protecting herself wasn't betrayal, and that her desire for independence wasn't ingratitude. It was self-respect, and it was long overdue.
6 months after Jennifer had left the motel room with nothing but a new understanding of her own worth, she stood in the doorway of her own apartment, a bright 2-bedroom space near downtown Denver that she'd furnished with her own money, decorated according to her own taste, and secured with locks that only she controlled. The journey from Bobby's ultimatum to this moment of independence had been neither quick nor easy, but it had been undeniably transformative. The restraining order Elena Motinez had helped her obtain had been the first domino to fall. When Bobby violated it by showing up at the veterinary clinic 3 days after it was served, his arrest had created an official record of his escalating behavior and had finally convinced Linda that her husband's actions went far beyond normal parental concern. The arrest had been dramatic in ways Jennifer couldn't have anticipated. Bobby had arrived at the clinic during Jennifer's shift, demanding that Dr. Chen fire her immediately and threatening to expose the whole operation to state licensing boards. When Dr. Chen refused and reminded Bobby about the restraining order, he'd become increasingly aggressive, ultimately grabbing Jennifer's arm hard enough to leave bruises while shouting that she was destroying his family with lies and manipulation. Marcus Rodriguez, the X-ray technician who would later become crucial to Jennifer's story, had been at the clinic that day to service the digital imaging equipment. He'd witnessed Bobby's assault on Jennifer and had immediately called 911, providing testimony that corroborated Jennifer's claims about Bobby's threatening behavior. "I've seen domestic violence before," Marcus had told the responding officers. "This man was completely out of control, and the young woman was clearly terrified. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was assault." Bobby's arrest had triggered a chain reaction that exposed the full scope of his deception and control. The police investigation into his false missing person report revealed a pattern of harassment against Jennifer's support network. Elena Martinez's financial forensics uncovered evidence that Bobby had systematically drained Jennifer's inheritance money while hiding the transactions from Linda. Most devastatingly for Bobby, Linda's shock at learning the true extent of his lies had prompted her own attorney and initiate divorce proceedings. The woman who'd supported Bobby's authority for 10 years had finally seen him for what he really was, and she was no longer willing to enable his behavior. "I failed you," Linda had told Jennifer during their first honest conversation in years. "I was so afraid of being alone again that I let Bobby convince me his control was love, his jealousy was protection, his financial management was generosity. I chose my comfort over your safety, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." The reconciliation with her mother had been complex and painful, requiring months of family therapy to address the damage that Bobby's manipulation had caused to their relationship. Elena had to confront her own complicity in Jennifer's abuse, while Jennifer had to learn how to trust her mother again without allowing guilt about Linda's situation to compromise her own boundaries. Through it all, Jennifer had continued working at the veterinary clinic, where her confidence and skills had flourished without the constant threat of Bobby's interference. Dr. Chen had formally promoted her to veterinary technician and was actively supporting her application to veterinary school. The professional growth that Bobby had tried to prevent was now happening at an accelerated pace, as if Jennifer was making up for years of artificially stunted development. The legal proceedings against Bobby had been lengthy and complicated, but ultimately successful. He'd pled guilty to financial fraud charges related to the misuse of Jennifer's inheritance, harassment charges for his threats against Dr. Chen and Amanda Torres, and assault charges for the incident at the clinic. His plea agreement included full restitution of the insurance money he'd spent, plus interest and penalties. Most importantly for Jennifer's long-term security, the criminal conviction had created a permanent legal record of Bobby's abusive behavior. If he ever attempted to contact her or her mother again, the violation of his probation terms would result in immediate imprisonment. The apartment Jennifer now called home represented more than just independent housing. It was proof that she could build a life based on her own choices and values. The walls were painted in colors she loved, the furniture was selected for comfort rather than Bobby's approval, and the space was filled with things that reflected her interests: veterinary textbooks, plants she was learning to nurture, and photos from hiking trips with new friends she'd met through the clinic. Jennifer had reconnected with some of the high school and college friends that Bobby's control had driven away. Many of them had wondered about her isolation and were relieved to learn that her distance hadn't been personal rejection, but protective withdrawal from a dangerous situation. The rebuilt friendships provided Jennifer with perspective on normal relationships, connections based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than power and control. Dr. Chen had become more than an employer. She'd become a mentor and friends whose belief in Jennifer's potential had been unwavering even during the darkest periods of Bobby's retaliation. Under Dr. Chen's guidance, Jennifer had completed her veterinary technician certification and was now halfway through the prerequisites for veterinary school.
"You have a gift for this work," Dr. Chen had said during Jennifer's recent performance review. "But more than that, you have the kind of resilience and compassion that comes from overcoming real adversity. You're going to help a lot of animals and a lot of people in your career." The compliment had meant everything to Jennifer, not just because it validated her professional abilities, but because it reframed her traumatic experiences as sources of strength rather than shame. The empathy she'd developed through years of walking on eggshells around Bobby made her exceptionally sensitive to animals in distress. The problem-solving skills she'd learned while navigating his control helped her troubleshoot complex medical cases. The patience she'd developed while enduring his manipulation served her well when working with difficult clients or anxious pet owners. Amanda Torres had also returned to Jennifer's life once the investigation into Bobby's false complaints had been completed. The experience of being professionally attacked for helping an abuse victim had actually strengthened Amanda's commitment to advocacy work and had led to policy changes that better protected domestic violence counselors from retaliation. "You did something important by fighting back," Amanda had told Jennifer. "Bobby's attack on the support network was so obvious and vindictive that it actually highlighted gaps in our system that needed to be addressed. Other advocates will be better protected because of what happened to us." Jennifer had learned that her individual journey toward independence had contributed to broader social changes that would benefit other abuse victims. The realization that her personal struggle had meaningful consequences beyond her own life gave her a sense of purpose that transcended her individual healing. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Jennifer's relationship with her own judgment and intuition. The self-doubt that Bobby had cultivated so carefully had been replaced by confidence in her ability to assess situations accurately and make decisions that served her best interests. When a new veterinarian assistant started at the clinic and began displaying the same controlling behaviors with female colleagues that Jennifer recognized from her experience with Bobby, she didn't hesitate to speak with Dr. Chand about her concerns. When the assistant's girlfriend started showing up to work with unexplained injuries, Jennifer immediately connected her with Amanda Torres and Elena Martinez. "I see the patterns now," Jennifer explained to the girlfriend during a careful conversation in the clinic's break room. "I know what it looks like when someone tries to convince you that control is love, that isolation is protection, and that your gut feelings about danger are dramatic overreactions." The young woman, Rebecca Johnson, barely 19, and recently moved to Denver to live with her controlling boyfriend, had initially resisted Jennifer's outreach. But Jennifer's patient persistence, informed by her own experience with the confusion and shame that abuse victims experience, had eventually created an opening for honest conversation. "How did you know?" Rebecca had finally asked. "How did you know it wasn't normal?" Because normal relationships don't require you to get permission for every choice. Because people who love you want you to grow and succeed, not shrink and submit. Because fear isn't a component of healthy families. Rebecca's successful escape from her abusive relationship, facilitated by the support network that had originally formed around Jennifer's situation, had convinced Jennifer that her traumatic experiences could be transformed into tools for helping others recognize and escape similar situations. As Jennifer prepared for bed in her own apartment, surrounded by the life she'd built through courage, persistence, and the support of people who believed in her worth, she reflected on how completely her world had changed. The powerless young woman who'd been trapped against the front door by Bobby's threats felt like a different person. Someone Jennifer remembered with compassion, but no longer identified with completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, who was now living independently in a senior community and attending therapy to address the trauma of her marriage to Bobby. "Proud of you today and every day. Dad would be amazed by the strong woman you've become. Good night, sweetheart." Jennifer smiled as she turned off the lights in her bedroom. Her actual bedroom, with a lock she'd installed herself and windows she could open without asking permission. Tomorrow, she would continue her veterinary studies, mentor Rebecca Johnson in her transition to independence, and build on the life she'd created through her refusal to accept Bobby's definition of her worth and capabilities. The ordinary world where she'd once felt invisible and powerless was gone forever, replaced by a reality where she was visible, valuable, and free to become whoever she chose to be. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate had taught Jennifer that her father's legacy wasn't just the insurance money Bobby had stolen. It was the strength, intelligence, and determination that no one could take away from her. And as Jennifer drifted off to sleep in her own bed, in her own home, living her own life according to her own values, she knew that the most important lesson she'd learned was the simplest one. She had always deserved better, and she had always had the power to demand it. The girl who'd been afraid to exist was now a woman who refused to be invisible.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.